everyone knows that automobile engines are rated by their horsepower. Why horsepower? That's the easy part. Up until about a century ago, horses were everywhere. They pulled carriages, hauled farm equipment, and carried soldiers into battle. So naturally, when automobiles were starting out, their engines were compared to the engine the potential customers were most familiar with, the horse. The real question is, what made horses so powerful to begin with? The ancestor of the horse wasn't a particularly powerful creature. 50 million years ago, the ancestor of a Clydesdale was little Eohippus, a creature about the size of a beagle, with 4 toes on its front feet and 3 toes on its hind feet. It lived in what it would later become the United States, but the climate at the time meant that its homeland was a swampy, wooded area. Now, with its small size and many toes, Eohippus was perfectly suited to this. But as the climate changed and North America began to dry up, the horse grew larger and began putting more and more of its weight on one central toe. But what's the advantage of having a one-toed horse versus a three-toed horse? In a bog or on a mountain, a horse's hoof would be a disadvantage. But the ancient equine's territory was turning into an open plain. On the plains, there isn't all that much need for agility, but a much greater need for speed. After all, there's not much place to hide if a predator like the ancient North American lion were to spot you. But if you can outrun it, then you've got a chance. When you have many toes, a portion of the energy of each foot strike goes into spreading the foot against the ground. With a single toe, all of the energy is focused on pushing onto the ground. The difference between an Olympic runner and the average jogger on your street isn't really how many strides they make per minute, it's how far they go with each stride, which depends on how much energy you can put into pushing off of the ground. As it evolved, the horse began to take better and better advantage of this, sculpting the strong single hoof of the modern horse, Equus caballus. There's another advantage to that little hoof, too. It's very light. How much energy it takes to swing a pendulum naturally depends on how heavy the weight at the end of the pendulum is. So with that small hoof, it doesn't take as much. In fact, humans can take advantage of this sometimes. One runner actually put on socks to keep blood from pooling in her feet and cut a few minutes off her time from one day to the next. That tiny bit of weight reduction made a significant impact on how fast she could run. Most of the muscles of a horse's leg are actually very high in the shoulders and hips. Long tendons connect these muscles to the bones lower down, allowing them to impart their energy from afar. Our hands use a similar system, though in this case the main advantage is the dexterity provided by skinny fingers. If you feel your wrists in the right places when you make a fist, you can feel the tendons growing taut. That's because most of the muscles that provide our strong grip and allow us to carry heavy loads are actually in our arms, while the few muscles in our fingers themselves are mostly to help us with more delicate movements. When we reach the shoulder region, we find another big difference between us and horses. Us humans have big, sturdy clavicles, in part a leftover from the days when our ancestors swung from branch to branch. Our sturdy clavicles allow us to hold heavy weights, including the weight of our own body if we hang from our hands. Horses never needed to swing from branch to branch, and a big clavicle would just get in the way, so they don't even have one. Instead, their hips and shoulders, or more precisely, pelvic and pectoral girdles, are beautifully shaped to make simple running as efficient as possible. But despite the beautiful efficiency of its design, the horse actually went extinct at the end of the Ice Age, along with many other animals. But that was just in North America. By then, the horse had already traveled across the land bridge into Asia, and from there into Europe and the Middle East, where it was first domesticated by humans. The horse would not be seen again in the Americas until the Spanish conquistadors brought them in the hulls of their boats. But by then, the horse had already made another change, many changes in fact, this time not caused by natural selection, but by artificial selection, careful breeding by humans. The first horses our ancestors rode were very short. Our feet would have dragged all across the ground. We wouldn't really have been able to ride them. Of course, back then, humans were shorter too. Most men didn't even reach 5 feet tall. But still, the horses of the time were so short, and people had to ride on the back rump, which is slightly higher, rather than in the dip of the back, as modern riders do. But not for too long. We bred the tallest and strongest horses together, producing a horse that was much better suited for carrying us. And whatever other needs we found, we sculpted a horse to fill it. We bred heavy draft horses to pull our farming equipment and carry heavy knights into battle. For those who needed something light for speed, whether just for racing or for a quick smash and grab, we bred horses that were just as light on their feet, swift and agile.
Even as mechanical technology has made the horse obsolete for many of its old jobs, we continue to shape the horse to suit what we want. Miniature horses and little ponies make for unique pets and even assistants for the blind. Thoroughbred racing hasn't slowed down, and every breeder watches his foals, hoping for the next Secretariat or Man-o'-War. The quarter horse and its relatives are still the first choice for those who work with cattle, whether as a job or just for the fun of the rodeo, and we continue to breed them for maneuverability and intelligence. And then there are the Frisians, standardbreds, Arabians, and so many other breeds that we love as much for their beauty as for their practicality. A horse's mechanical power comes from evolution, but perhaps their true power comes from their majesty. The horse has been just as influential in art and mythology as it has been in the practical history of civilization.